Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and welcome. So we'll have a two-day workshop on information manipulation and dissemination, especially with regards to authoritarianism. This workshop is funded by Australian Political Studies Association, Australian Research Council, and Gerda Henkel Foundation, Germany. We'll have 8 roundtable discussions, and each roundtable will be kicked off by a keynote speaker. The first one is Foreign Interference Campaigns on Social Media, Insights from Field Theory and Computational Social Science by Robert Eklund, Professor Robert Eklund from the Australian National University. Over to you, Robert.
You can stay there. Yeah. Okay. Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Lisa for organising this, and it's great to be here. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. I'm here from Canberra, the ANU. So there's some people here that I know very well, and there's a lot of new faces, so I'm very happy to be here. Nice to meet a few people and find out what this is we've got here.
I can't hear them. But if I, maybe I do have to be up there, I think. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, the room is not picking it up. Okay. Okay. Once again, I'm very happy to be here. So, Isan, it's about 20 minutes, did you say? Yeah, okay. So, so this is some old work and some new work that I'm going to be talking about today. In terms of the theoretical sort of framework, so the overall aim of the work that I'm presenting is to understand the behaviour and impact of trolls, and so this is using one of the so-called Twitter takedown data sets. This is one I'll talk more about it later on, but it was released some time ago, and in this work, I'm interested in seeing how, I guess, developing a framework for understanding how, what the trolls were doing, and what impact they were having in the Australian politics information environment. In terms of when we initially started working on this topic, well, I don't think there was like a theoretical framework that was sort of guiding at least my initial sort of exploration of these data. Subsequently, and this is not really necessarily great academic process, in some ways trying to sort of then, after having a bit of a look through the data, then trying to think about, well, what type of conceptual frameworks might be useful for this work. And so I would not say that I've come up with a sort of a definitive sort of, I've settled on a particular literature that I'm going to be drawing upon. But there are two that I guess are of interest to me. Field theory. So this is an analytical framework for studying competitive behaviour in different settings. It's been used in the context of activism, protest, but also cultural markets, universities. And so you can see there some of the work that's been done, Denoy, Fligstein and McAdam, and then I'm also got there a paper with Matthew O'Neill, who's here with us today, that we used field theory to understand the adoption of risk issues by environmental activist groups. And so this is something that I think could be useful for the work that I'm presenting on today. However, I don't know whether I've got the data that would be required to be able to map the field of trolls, because we need to have, I think, social connections are important, some sort of understanding of the social ties, and we don't have that with the sorts of data that at least I have access to. Also, in terms of field theory, the fields are often defined by an understanding of the different types of capital that these different actors possess, economic capital or cultural capital. And, you know, we don't really know anything about these trolls apart from what did they do on Twitter. And there's some metadata that might be associated with these these Twitter accounts that have been taken down, but not really much. So I'm not sure how we'll go with field theory, but that's a sort of a theoretical framework that I'm interested in. The other area is agenda setting, and that comes from political science and communication. And this is a huge field, and I've got just a couple of sort of, I guess, selected references here. Darren Halpin, who's a colleague at ANU, has done a lot of work on agenda setting by advocacy groups, looking at kind of what strategies different advocacy groups may undertake. Like, do they go, for example, do they go broad in terms of the issue portfolio that they're engaging with, or do they go narrow? And how do these strategies maybe correlate with different measures of success? And also, how do they correlate with the resources that these organisations have access to? Another sort of theme or theme of research in this area is more from the communication studies area or communication science, which is, I've got an example here, which is where these authors, Gao and Louis studied so-called network agenda setting effects. So they were looking at how hashtag portfolios, I guess, or hashtags that were being engaged with by one set of actors may have influenced the hashtags that were being engaged with by another set of actors. So is there some kind of causality or some sort of association between when one group of actors engages with particular topics using hashtags on Twitter, and then another group that subsequently also engage with those? And this was using network a quadratic assignment process to understand correlation between networks. So that's also an interesting area of research for me that is related to what I'm about to present. Okay, let's jump into the work. So firstly, the old work. The genesis of this was a Senate submission for the Senate Select Committee on Foreign Interference through Social Media, and that was with Matthew O'Neill and also Mike Jensen from University of Canberra. What we did, and by the way, I know some people are probably experiencing PTSD as a result of the news from the US last night, but I'm sorry, I didn't. Here he is. So the context for this, the Twitter takedown data set that we got access to, and there's been ones that have been released subsequently, was the concerns about foreign interference on social media during 2016, in particular in the context of the 2016 US presidential election. And it was the Russian Internet Research Agency was a main actor, but not the only foreign actor that was said to be present and engaging with foreign interference in or attempting to interfere in the US election outcomes through social media such as Twitter. So in this Senate submission, our aim was to take the data that was available at the time, that was released at the time, and say, well, okay, who of these trolls, what were they doing in the Australian information environment, and what were they engaging in? So this is a sort of a methodological kind of question, because we have to define what the information environment is, and then try to find out, well, which trolls were present in that information environment, what were they doing? And so I'm going to quickly take you through the approach that we used for this Senate submission. We I had a data set of the Australian political Twitter sphere that I collected through a project with Darren Halpin at ANU for the period September 2015 to October 2016. I collected all of the tweets that were authored by Australian federal politicians, plus all of the tweets where they were being mentioned, replied to, or retweeted. From that data set, I constructed a subset of 2,420 users who had tweeted at least once per month over this period. And these are active tweeters, political tweeters. This was a data reduction strategy that I undertook at the time. Then I identified a set of hashtags that I felt pertained to clearly identifiable topics, such as events, issues, and places. And in the report, we labelled these as issue hashtags. Then the next step was to construct a semantic network. So this is a network of hashtags where two hashtags are connected to one another if they co-occurred in a tweet. So it's a way to identify, it's thematic content analysis effectively through semantic networks. The idea here is that we might be able to see clusters of hashtags that indicate particular issues or topics that people were tweeting about. So this is because I wanted to have visualization as a sort of a central part of this Senate submission, and it's a really big part of the work that I do more generally. The challenge with semantic networks such as this, I mean, and this is not actually as bad as they can get, is you often just end up with a hairball. This is kind of the network scientists' kind of bane of their life is, what do you do about the hairballs? And so one of the, again, a data reduction strategy that I undertook was to construct a minimum spanning tree. So this is a network where all of the hashtags are connected in a tree structure with the minimum number of links to connect them up. So it's basically covering the entire set of hashtags, and it's a reduced visual, or it's a data reduction step to show how these hashtags are connected to one another, but they're spread out because it's a minimum spanning tree approach. Hashtags that are located close to one another tend to be semantically related in the sense that they tend to be co-occurring in tweets. And so the technique was quite effective in the sense that, if I don't have visualizations that I can actually interact with here, but if you scroll in and look at clusters, you can see, okay, that's to do with jobs, employment, that's to do with taxation, that's to do with foreign affairs issues, etc. So this type of network is what I'm referring to as the Australian politics information environment. It's a representation of it. The question then is, well, what were the trolls doing? Were they actually even present in this information environment? And if so, what were they doing, and were they having an impact that could be measurable? I identified IRA, or Internet Research Agency, authored tweets from using this takedown data set. This is where the takedown data set comes into it. And so, the IRA were primarily tweeting about US politics, and I think also Brexit, and European politics or social issues were also top of their, of focus. But some of them were tweeting about Australian issues. And so I used an approach to filter out or to identify those tweets, and therefore those troll accounts that were engaged with Australian political issues. And it was kind of a simple heuristic that I used. The word Australia had to appear, or at least one of the hashtags that are clearly related to Australian politics, like Australian Auspol hashtag, Ausvotes, Quanda. It's the Q&A ABC TV program, although I subsequently found out, I think it's an animal as well. So there was a bit of a false positive with that. And also when they contained at least one of the issue hashtags. So these are the hashtags that are being tweeted by these regular political tweeters. And so then I was able to overlay the troll activity onto the to the semantic network. So these red dots are where a hashtag has been tweeted by one of the IRA trolls. And so you can see here that they tweeted about Nauru. I can't read all of the other labels here. Hopefully I'm zooming in here. So and so these lines that join these hashtags are where a particular troll account tweeted with both of the hashtags in a single tweet. Okay. And so what did we do with this? Well, in our Senate submission, there were 3 case studies. Firstly, there was one about audience building for future influence payoff. And that was really, Mike Jensen was I think, the primary contributor to that case study. The second one was issue payload injection, which I'll talk a bit more about now. And then finally, there was a sort of a more qualitative study that Matthew was the primary driver of, spreading bad vibes. So we did a sort of a year in the life of troll account where you can see the number there. This is a Twitter account that was tweeting about Australian related topics. And it was like, well, what were they tweeting about? And it was kind of bad news, basically. Or, you know, whenever there was something bad that was happening in Australia, they were there retweeting or tweeting about it. But in terms of the issue payload injection, the idea here is that what we discovered was that, so I should also mention that this is a temporal, the framework is for a temporal sort of analysis, in the sense that I've constructed these semantic networks that we're seeing here, but I've done them on a month-to-month basis. And so what we found was that there was one particular troll account that was tweeting about the issue of refugees. That was a focus for this particular troll account. But what we found was that earlier in the year of the year that we have the data for, both troll and non-troll accounts engaged with the topic of refugees in a similar manner. However, later in the period, the troll account started to make connections between Manus and ISIS. So Manus Island, which is where refugee and asylum seeker processing was taking place, and ISIS, the terror group. And this was a connection that was not being made by the non-trolls or the Australian political tweeters. And so our conclusion was that there was this an attempt by the troll account to inject an issue of national security into the issue of, or to align it or connect it to the issue of asylum seeker and refugees in Australia. And so this was, I guess, an example of where we think this sort of framework is helpful and able to, I guess, identify unusual or interesting behaviour. So that's the old work. And now in the final 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about some of the new work that I'm doing with these same data. So the Senate submission research, which I've just discussed, it provided an approach for identifying an information environment. And also we provided some insights into some interesting trolls. Building on this, I'm now going to present a sort of a framework, or the beginnings of a framework for characterising behaviour and impact of all of the trolls who were operating in the Australian politics information environment as I've defined it. So there were a total of 70 troll accounts, and they had authored 117 tweets. So it's not a huge, after all of the data reduction I had to do to get the information environment specified, because that's quite a constrained environment that I've identified with just a selection of hashtags that I think are interesting. And it's a particular period of time. Now, there weren't actually many troll accounts engaged with it. If I broaden the kind of the filtering or reduce the filtering, this will expand. But for the time being, it's 70 troll accounts. So in terms of the dimensions of behaviour and impact, the ones that I'm focusing on at this stage, and these are kind of, I guess, inspired a bit by the agenda setting literature. Firstly, salience. Did the troll tweet on important or prominent topics, or were they tweeting on marginal topics? And so I measured this by looking at, for a given hashtag that was tweeted by a troll in a given period, how many other participants in the Australian politics information environment also tweeted about the hashtag? Was it something that there was a lot of engagement on, or it was just a marginal issue that no one else was really tweeting about? The second measure is complexity. Were the topics that were being tweeted by or engaged in by the troll similar or close to each other? So was the troll basically being very narrow in their focus, in the sense that it was just, okay, it was just refugees, okay, that was what they were focused on, or it was just the economy? Or were they, in a given month, were they tweeting on a wider range of topics that were quite semantically distant from each other? And so I'm measuring that by essentially a distance metric based on this semantic network. If a given troll, I mean, these red dots don't indicate tweets by a single troll. These are a number of trolls. But, this dot here, which is in this cluster to do with coal and energy, it's quite far away from down here where we have Medicare and health issues. And if in a given month the troll was tweeting on both kind of coal and also Medicare, then that's an indication of kind of a broad approach that they're taking in terms of issue engagement. So what did we find? Oh, okay, then there's two other measures. Area of focus. What did the troll tweet about? And also impact. Did the troll change the Australian politics information environment in any sort of measurable way? So in terms of the first two measures, salience versus complexity, I've got this figure here which measures on the x-axis its complexity. So it's essentially, if it's a dot that's right out here on the x-axis, these dots are troll accounts, and this particular one here it's right out on the x-axis. This is a troll that was engaged in what I characterise as being complex behaviour. They were tweeting about a wide range of topics that were actually distant from one another in the semantic network. On the y-axis, it's salience. And so again, this dot up here is a troll account that was picking up on very popular issues. When this troll was tweeting about a particular issue, a lot of other people had tweeted about it in the same month. So this then leads to what I call the troll efficiency frontier. And so what I've done is I've just drawn lines across the, it's basically showing the trolls who were very efficient in their tweeting behaviour. I should mention that these measures, complexity and salience, are being measured on a per tweet basis. So these two that I just highlighted before, this is one who's got very low complexity but high salience, and this one over here has high complexity but low salience. So this is where I guess I'm bringing in some ideas that come out of economics, this data envelope analysis or production possibility frontiers. Some of you may have seen diagrams like this before, because there's this group in Australia called the Higher Education Research Group, who like to put these things out where they plot universities showing their efficiency. In this diagram here on the x-axis, it's number of students taught by per head count of staff. On the y-axis, it's the number of research outputs per head of staff. And you can see that University of UWA is very efficient in terms of research production there. They're on this efficiency frontier. So I will just say that I'm a bit uncertain about me producing a troll efficiency frontier analysis, because it's almost like I'm setting myself up to be a management consultant for trolls. How do you become more efficient in your troll behavior. But anyway, these are the tools that I'm putting out there, and they can be used for good or for evil. Okay, so areas of focus. I know I'll wrap this up very quickly. Apologies for going a bit over time. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to know whether or not the trolls could be clustered in certain ways. You know, were they just sort of randomly kind of, you know, all focusing on different things, or were there kind of themes that they were converging on? I mean, I figured there would be particular themes and there would be some convergence, because these accounts are, you know, likely being, well, they're all being run by the same agency, the Internet Research Agency. So there is coordination going on there. So what I'm doing here is a sort of an old school correspondence analysis. I mean, it's a data reduction strategy. I could have used, I could have gone back to the semantic network analysis, or I could be using other techniques. But correspondence analysis is a technique that's been used a lot in context of field theory or field analysis, and so it's something that I've recently regained interest in. So this map shows the correspondence analysis coordinates, the first two dimensions. On the left-hand side, it's the columns, which are the hashtags that were being tweeted by these trolls. And what we see here is that there's 8 clusters that have been identified. And yeah, it's let me see if I can zoom in a bit. Yeah, you can see, you know, the topics that, you know, there's Rio 2016. Down here, it's Brussels, Brussels attacks. So this is about ISIS-related attacks in Europe. Yeah, not all the words are showing up on this plot. Up the top here, it's like racism and corruption. On the left-hand side, it is clusters of troll accounts based on the hierarchical clustering of the correspondence analysis coordinates. So the next and close to final step was, I was interested to know, well, of those troll accounts that I could identify as being in clusters, what were they tweeting about? Like, I guess, this is another way of showing what they were tweeting about. And so cluster 1 was focused on Black Lives Matter. Some of these clusters are very small, by the way. It could be just actually one troll in the. Cluster 2 was about sort of technology, environment, science, gun control. Well, these are the terms that were the hashtags that were present in that cluster. And you can see the other clusters. This big one, cluster 4, is just a whole lot of countries that are being mentioned. So the next thing is going back to the troll efficiency frontier. You might be interested to know, well, what was the troll that had high salience, low complexity tweeting about? And so this is an example tweet, or it's a retweet that this troll pushed out. And so this was high salience. So one of these hashtags, I guess it's probably let them stay, but also ABC 730, or I think it resolves to ABC 7, I'm not sure, but they probably, well, there's also Manasanaru as well. These were being tweeted a lot in that particular month. Down here, this is the troll that has high complexity, low salience. It's, I don't know, veterans. I don't know which of these hashtags that were the ones that were kind of semantically different or distant from one another. I haven't drilled down to that. But this is kind of an example of how we can then bring in some context to these particular trolls that I've identified as being on the troll efficiency frontier. The final thing I'll mention is about impact. So did the trolls actually have any impact on the online conversation? Well, I think this is kind of an age-old question for people like myself who do research on social media. Like, how do we measure impact and influence? And often it gets down to just measures of really what can be considered to be engagement. Like, were things getting retweeted a lot? or has someone been replied to a lot? That these are they become they're more like measures of engagement rather than impact or influence. So I'm interested to know, is this these semantic networks that I've constructed, are they being is the presence of the troll actually having a significant impact on this the information environment as represented by this semantic network? And so the the technique for doing this is to construct a semantic network for everyone, and then sequentially remove actors or remove the tweets that actors have tweeted, and then reconstruct the semantic network. And to the extent that it gets reconfigured, because if you take away an important or a particular tweeter's or troll's tweets, then if that leads to a significant reconfiguration of the semantic network, then that is a measure of impact. It's a highly, I would say it's a highly sort of, well, it's a proposal for a measure of impact, I should say. So we've got an information environment here. It's being represented as a semantic network. What happens if we remove nodes, like, and does it get reconfigured? And so that's what's happening in this last section of the work, which is still ongoing. I'm using graph edit distance. So it's a measure of similarity between two graphs, which is effectively, if you've got one graph and how many changes need to be made to it, like how many nodes need to be deleted or how many edges need to be deleted or added until it looks like another graph. And that's what I'm doing. And so these are the graph edit distances for the 2,403 political tweeters. I haven't got the information on the trolls available as yet, but this is kind of the first step towards that. So these are all of the political tweeters and their graph edit distance, which is I'm proposing as a measure of impact or influence on the information environment. Nearly 50% of them have no impact. You know, if you remove and this is not surprising, if someone's only tweeted, you know, a handful of times in a given month, they're not going to have an impact, a measurable impact on this information environment. But I'm more interested in the relative differences. This is the showing the this is the density of the graph edit distance. It's a sort of, I wouldn't say it's normal, but it's normalish shaped, which I guess is understandable. It's not we're not going to see power laws in this distribution here. The Australian political Twitter sphere database is centred around federal politicians, but the politicians don't have the greatest impact on the issue space or the information environment using this measure. The highest ranked politician was Julie Bishop. Remember, this is an old data set, who was ranked 56. There were other well-known users in the top 100, as you can see here, but most of the users who were influential based on this measure were just usernames that I'd never seen before. So the final step in this work will be to use this measure to or apply it to the trolls to see what impact they were having, and that's the next stage of the work. So I'll finish there. That's all my presentation. Thanks for your attention. I'm looking forward to hearing comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert. So yeah, we'll have round tables, start just like a Q&A session. Yeah. If you have any if you want to lecture for a while, yeah. Also,
it's not going to be picked up by the microphone. I guess the question is, you know, this is, as you said, a data set from 2016. So historically, since then, there's been some changes, I think, in the world. So, you know, in terms of access, how would you get a similar data set today? You know, the one thing I could think about is if you collaborated with some defense agency, That would be a way to get around that. But then in terms of the characteristics, so I assume that your salience and complexity scales to incorporate, creation of video, AI, and that kind of stuff. But what about this? Just the multiplication of accounts? Like, I mean, do you think there's any difference in the Twitter that was then and the Twitter that the behavior of the behavior that was what I'm trying to say?
Okay, we're going to the first question about the data are old and one can't collect sort of data like the way it wasn't easy to do, but it was possible back in 2016. Yeah, so I see this as being primarily a methodological contribution. It's not really that relevant that to the extent that there are still trolls in the world and and there's still foreign interference and it's taking place in social media environments, then I would contend that this type of research is relevant, even though it's an old data set. Also, to the extent that the sort of basic kind of behaviours on social media haven't changed, and I don't think they have changed. And yes, there have been changes to certain platforms in terms of data availability, but also in terms of the population of people who are using them. But still, the key social media behaviour is you set up an account, you start talking to the world, you promote or amplify other people's messages by retweeting them, or you reply to people. I think the same sort of fundamental behaviours are still there. And it's now taking place on other platforms like Mastodon, for example. So I'm not so fazed by the fact that this is an old data set. I mean, the sort of world that I work in, where social network analysis, you'll see papers getting published in the journal Social Networks that are using the Southern Women's data set from 1947 or something like that, from nutsheds in Mississippi, and no one ever says, "Oh, hang on, what are the Southern women doing now?" I mean, it's just like it's a data set that is kind of a classic data set that is, and these people will build new measures of network centrality or clustering or whatever with this old data set. So I guess I'm proposing something similar to this: is that yes, the data are not available, in terms of as easily available today. But as you said, we might be able to get these data from, defence partnerships. Although, if someone wanted to fund me to do a study like this on Mastodon, I could do it for you now. Are all, or yes, I mean, these environments are still there. But it's just not. Twitter is not available as much. And then going back to the question about behaviours, well. Yeah, I mean, AI, we're now, I guess it's now these tweets. Yeah, I think the behaviours are more complex. You're right, in the sense that back in those days, trolls were essentially retweeting, but now they'll be using AI to actually craft tweets, and it will be probably more attempting to actually not just do information diffusion through retweets, but it will be actually conversation attempts at actually, and that's of interest, but that's a difference compared to this data set. Thank you, Matthew. I already knew you were going to ask about the age of the data set you mentioned before, so I'm prepared for that.
Anyone else?
Hi. Can I ask a question now, or is it someone before me? I've got a question, Robert.
Yep. Can you hear us? Yes. Yep. Please do. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I worked with Twitter mapping for my master's thesis. I was looking at disaster tweets, and I was on Twitter quite a lot, and that was a few years ago now. But it was probably after the period of your research. But I found it very interesting because looking at your graph with the Twitter handled I wrote it down actually when I looked at the graph, Juliet 777777. She was the high complexity troll. And I also noticed that same account because I was looking at Twitter a lot in real time. I also noticed this was in 2021. This is more of an intelligence comment, I suppose, that I was actually witness to it. But I was looking at the emergence of QAnon and how it, like there was large Twitter purges going on during that period, anything with that hashtag. And that was in the previous ownership, of course, with Twitter. And then it seemed to morph into another important hashtag that I noticed really took off. And I felt that maybe the trolls being, you know, facing that shutdown because it was widely mentioned in the media, it became another hashtag called WWG1WGA, which is, I think it's an acronym for where we go one, we go all. The trolling was terrible. It was quite vicious. And this went on for quite a while. So I was interested how it just morphed into another one. So they basically just piggybacked onto this other one. I don't know, you know, there might have been legitimate accounts using that hashtag, you know, of course, too. But I found it very, very interesting. And some of these names are quite familiar. And I'm wondering whether your earlier work would flow on into a study to look at that, how that hashtag use morphed in order for them to evade being banned off the platform, or whether that work has already been done.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for your question. I'll just mention that the that account that you picked up on, the Juliet one, that account was being retweeted. There was a tweet being retweeted by the.
Sorry, yeah. Okay.
So we don't know the names of the. We do actually have the user ID. No, actually, on those two tweets, there were these hashes that were provided by Twitter. So we don't even have the user ID for that particular troll account. But it's regarding your question about morphing or sort of hashtag evolution. This approach that I've presented today is not directed at that as such, but it's an area that I'm very interested in, and actually Tim and I have been kind of interested in working on sort of flows of attention in that way, and how hashtags might be kind of used in particular phases, and then they become, you know, they evolve into other hashtags. So it's not, I can't point to work directly on that, but it's an area of interest to me. So hopefully maybe some other people will know work in that area. So thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
This might be a stupid question, but I was just wondering, so the data set that you included is about Australian implemented, right?
Yep.
The author shows and the tweet they mentioned Australia in some of the questions. So I was wondering, could there be a way to study how the statistics posts about the US that do not directly mention Australia also impact the disruption of Australia?
Really good question. I guess you'd have to find some way of linking the two together, and it might be through kind of I guess keywords, you know, you know, in the US they start talking about a particular issue, and then, you know, a couple of months later it's cropping up in Australia. So or it's actually even more temporal kind of correlations, in the sense that it just kind of gets down to issue agenda or agenda setting kind of approaches, where it's, you know, did the issue emerge in the US context first, and then it appears in the Australian context. So that is possible to study that, but then actually identifying causal sort of links is challenging, I think.
I mean,
there
are some ways, you know, potentially to do that kind of work, and like Rob says, it's very difficult to establish causality and what even is that. But I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with folks about using models like Ranger causality. So, you know, old models from like econometrics and time series modeling, and they're not perfect, but if you if you start from like the basis that like, if a whole bunch of people are saying these things at this time, and then you want to see whether like people, the volume of what they're talking about, if it's like even, for example, it's changing at this time, you can kind of treat it a bit like a chicken and an egg problem, you know, where you can run these models and say, okay, is there a statistically significant, like statistical pattern with the volume of things at this time and then the volume of things at that time? And then I'm only saying this because I've been like super interested in this problem and have applied forensic causality a few times in a few different papers to try and get at that. But it's a really good question. It's really hard to do, and it's like, what do you even get out of those models if you're looking at like keyword counts? You know, everyone in the US is talking about election fraud in 2016, and then, you know, in 2017, everyone in Australia is doing it on Ozpol. And your model says that there's a relationship there, you know, is it really? But yeah, I don't know, it's worth it. There is some kind of models that you can look at that could be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hello. During election campaigns, opinion polls will often ask what are the key issues. And the question is as to what the relationship is between your troll data and opinion poll key issue data, and is there a way to see if the trolls are actually reordering the priority of key issues?
Yeah, no, that would be another very interesting measure of impact. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to get with the approach that I presented. It is trying to get an understanding about how the trolls might be tracking the opinions or the issues, but these are as they're being reflected in Twitter by non-troll accounts, and so I'm not leveraging sort of offline sort of representative sort of information about opinions. But yeah, I would say ultimately that if we're wanting to understand impact, and I've seen it being done in the context of in other settings, like there was some work from academics in Hong Kong where they were looking at Facebook activity around protest topics in obviously in the Hong Kong setting, and they were then correlating it with offline opinion data to see whether or not, again, it's kind of like this agenda setting sort of phenomenon. Is it the case that issues that were emerged on Facebook and being discussed heavily on Facebook, then a couple of months later you're seeing that actually on the representative population level data, it's actually this issue has emerged, and so that then gets to a sort of a possible causal connection.
In the old order of the 24-hour political cycle, the morning newspapers set the agendas, which are then taken up by the talkback radio people. And if they bite, they're probably appearing also on morning television, and they go on to evening TV news. And that's an interesting question because we're talking about there's a short-term cycle, and there's also a long-term cycle, as we've seen with the question about America. The whole question about kind of echo chambers. That's so hard to know.
Yes.
I mean, the world is watching the next few years as to whether there will be a Trump echo chamber in Austria, Czechia, Germany, Australia, and France.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you can compare the troll activity that you investigate here in other cases in other countries. So are they different from others, or they are similar in the way they behave or the impact that they have? I know you haven't done research on that, but
I mean, I guess I'm interested in a framework that, this to be, I think, interesting, generally interesting work. I think it needs to be a framework that could be applied in other settings. I mean, otherwise, so I am interested in a framework that could be used in a comparative setting.
And so I guess it then gets down to what are the key ingredients. But to say we were wanting to do something like what I've done here, but instead do it for the UK, because UK, politics, these IRA trolls were also targeting the UK. What I contend is that you'd have to have a data set that you can claim, reasonably claim as being representative of representing the information environment in the UK on Twitter at that period of time. And so I'm sure there are people who have those sorts of data sets. I mean, this is what we were doing for 10 years, is kind of make, and I was involved in some of this with Tim and Matthew, kind of sort of doing these large scale collections on Twitter, to do with hashtags often. And this one that I was talking about today was different because it was actually tracking Australian politicians' accounts. But I've conducted large scale database, constructed large scale databases of Twitter activity during, for example, the 2016 US election. Tweets that were occurring during the first debate. And I've done the same thing for the 2020 US presidential election. And so it would be possible to use those databases and say, okay, well, this was the information environment that existed centered around the debate in 2020. And if we then have information on trolls, where Twitter have identified that there were these, have released data on troll accounts, then you could do this kind of analysis. You could say, well, to the extent that this 1.5 hours of Twitter activity during the debate was a sort of an information environment, where were the trolls in this, and were they exerting any sort of measurable sort of effect? Thanks. We've got another question on that.
Okay,
Oh, sorry. Okay.
good morning, Robert. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really fascinating.
Thank you.
I just wanted a quick question, if I may. Can you tell me about the criteria that you were using in order to identify these tweets as originating from the IRA?
In terms of the, I really don't. Can you hear me as I'm sitting here? Can you? Yeah. Okay.
I can. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. In terms of the, that was easy because Twitter released a data set where, and they released subsequent data sets as well, but where they say, these are all of the troll accounts that we identified. I guess it was through Twitter internal processes, but also I think they were working in concert with the US State Department. And so they identified the troll accounts, and the data set involves it's all of the tweets, but also the media that these troll accounts were tweeting. Like if they linked to a web page, or if they had a video or something, then that's also stored in the database. So that was kind of the easy part. The harder part or the part that I was more focused on was saying, well, of all of these trolls, which ones can we reasonably say were somehow present in the Australian politics information environment? I don't know. Beautiful. I'm looking up here. Yeah, you can see it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks. Yeah, true. Yes, true. Yeah. Yes, sure.
Well, first of all, thanks, Robert, because I don't do social media analysis, but yet I completely understood your presentation, which is rare. You've got a fantastic way of explaining to people who might not.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for that.
I'm glad.
I just wanted to say I was looking at an article yesterday because the journalist Barbara Simmons had linked to it. It's a Nature article that's titled "Misunderstanding the Harm of Misinformation." And it really relates to your presentation because I haven't looked at it really closely yet, but it was looking at the IRA influence in the US election and saying that it's really been exaggerated, and the way they were saying that is because of the amount of exposure, because they were saying these were all the tweets on this subject at that time, and this represents this tiny proportion.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about exposure. But I was wondering what you think about that, because I feel like that's quite limited, because we know that for a start, Twitter can have an outsized effect at that time, particularly because of the amount of journalists on there who are picking things up.
Yeah.
And of course, I guess I'm more interested in as well, you know, that there's a small proportion of population on Twitter, but if these things carry into press, carry into other kinds of media offline, just wondering your thoughts on that, about that claim that, you know, this low exposure is a way of measuring that.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point. Thanks for that. Yeah, this is kind of excuse me. This has come up in different contexts in research that I'm interested in or involved in. There's been similar claims made about research into echo chambers and filter bubbles, which is kind of a hot topic, and it's interesting. I think there's kind of it's a contested, polarized academic space around echo chambers and filter bubbles, whether they exist, what is their impact. There are some who claim that it's not a problem at all. They use, for example, survey data that suggests that social media users are more likely to get a sort of a more balanced, in inverted commas, diet of information than people who only use offline news sources. And there's research that shows that even those people that spend time looking at sort of extremist or sort of political content, news content, those people are more likely to spend more time on the centrist kind of mainstream political news sites. And so it's been used by different authors to basically say that the echo chamber and filter bubble kind of problem has been, there's a moral panic about it, and it's overdone. And in fact, people kind of have a balanced diet, and so it's nothing to worry about. And I think that's a similar kind of argument that you're talking about with regards to the impact of troll behaviour. If it's just like a drop in the ocean, like, yes, they were tweeting about these topics, these divisive social topics, but if you look at the volume of information at the time, it was a small amount. But I mean, I'm on your side. I mean, otherwise, I guess I wouldn't be kind of doing this sort of work if I sort of felt it was kind of like not important to study echo chambers or to study troll behaviour. And I think the thing is that even if it's a small number of people who are getting exposed to this information, they can have a sort of an outsized sort of an effect. And it's not even just, it's also, as you said, there's these kind of agenda setting, kind of implications. So yes, it's a small drop in the ocean on Twitter, but if journalists pick it up, it then makes its way into the mainstream. So I absolutely agree with that. But even if you just focus just on the social media behaviour, I think if there are people who are going down those rabbit holes, and it's to do with conspiracy theory as well, the impact of that, I think those people can have an outsized effect. There's kind of economists might use, this is my background as an economics, so occasionally I try to bring in some economics terms that probably often don't go down too well, but it's like a sort of a negative externality effect. There's a small group of people who are engaging this material that can have an outsized effect on everyone else. So I guess that's my response to it, is I think that the science isn't settled, and it's still it's a worthwhile area to be researching. Otherwise I guess I'm probably wasting my time. So it's a bit like jobs for people like me. Of course I'm going to say it's important because this is the area that I work in, but I truly believe it too.
You're challenging the algorithm arguments that the algorithms will take you down the path that you show you already want to go. That's a frequent confusion that people make between epistemic bubbles and echo chambers, and we have this cyclical revisiting of it. What matters is your attitude towards how you react to attitude challenging content.
Yeah.
And so if you're, we all have a phone and we have a feed, and we carry it around, and we get exposed to different content, and that's curated. But if we get something that challenges a viewpoint, we'll assess it rationally, hopefully. But if you're in an echo chamber, all the authority comes from one source, whether it's QAnon or Trump. And anything that challenges that is fake news, is disinformation. So you reject attitude challenging content,
completely. And so I guess the impact of trolls or people who start, those sorts of trends is that if it gets picked up by an elite actor who has a huge influence, then it has a huge impact. And so we now have, still, I don't know how many, 30 to 40% of the US population who thinks that the 2020 election was stolen. They believe it. And, so that's quite significant. And we had an illustration of the impact yesterday. I mean, it's not the only reason, but, it feeds into that. And so it does kind of have a snowball effect possible.
Yep. Yep.
It might be slightly far from what you're presenting, and in this case, you already had guide accounts and have some information about post-tweeting and who should be considered as pro-innocent. But how do you think we can differentiate between troll accounts that are coming from outside within a nation, international affairs, from global solidarity movements? So suppose in my mind, there's Bangladesh, when the protest was going on, there was international solidarity, but coming out from different countries, people were supporting the students, but now people are claiming that it was an extension conspiracy to actually dethrone Sheikh Hasina government in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So how, now this becomes a question whether it was trolls who were or international interference in the Bangladeshi state, or was it actually a solidarity that was coming out and going into the Bangladeshi student movement that was happening. So I was thinking, how would we differentiate if it's not as clear as these are the accounts who are trying to do it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I know Tim's done a lot of work on coordinated inauthentic behaviour. I don't know if you'll talk about it today, but I mean, this is it is a challenge. I mean, Tim and I at one point with a colleague, we were interested in looking at sort of I guess it was kind of coordinated approaches for detecting coordination amongst protest activities. And there was work that was going on in the US around the Black Lives Matter hashtag, and someone had published, and this is at the time, Tim and I didn't work on this directly, but it was around the time we were thinking about engaging in this particular area of research in the context of Black Lives Matter or similar kind of movements. And some researchers in the US published work, or maybe as a preprint, which basically identified a lot of Black Lives Matter accounts as being part of a coordinated sort of effort. And it was controversial because it was seen as potentially delegitimizing what was a lot of people considered to be a grassroots movement. I don't think this was the intention of the researchers, but it was basically they were labeling this as kind of a astroturfing, inauthentic coordinated activity. Not that they used that term as such. And so then there was this question about, well, to what extent does that then delegitimize a real movement? But then on the other hand, other people might have argued that, well, it's an information environment, it's a competitive space, so even the so-called the good kind of actors who are legitimate social movements need to make use of the tools that are available in order to get their messages out there. And so that might mean basically having a number of Twitter accounts that are all retweeting the same thing, and then it gets picked up as a sort of an inauthentic coordinated activity. So I don't have a good answer for you, I'm afraid. I sort of, I keep on pointing to Tim because Tim has kind of done more work in this area, but I tend to focus more on the data sets. This data set is the only one I've really worked on with kind of bad actors in there that everyone know are bad actors. I tend to work with more with data sets that are more where there might be bots in there or troll accounts, but it's not really the purpose of my work is to try and discern them.
So yeah, so I might open it up further, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, since you keep pointing it out,
Sorry, Tim.
I'm sorry to jump in. It's actually, it's such a good question, I think, and part of the problem is that, like, behaviorally, what we call like coordinated inauthentic behavior, or at least that's what Facebook, coined it as in 2018. Then everyone seems to sort of picked up on these terms of coordination and inauthenticity and sort of used them. Behaviorally, online activism, variously defined, and then like influence operations of the kind that Rob's talking about, they structurally look almost the same, when you map them out using coordinated network analysis techniques. So, if you define coordination as, okay, a bunch of accounts are doing the same thing at the same time on the same topic, whether it's retweeting, whether it's like tweeting almost exactly the same or even duplicated topics and content and things like that, like it becomes really difficult to determine, well, what's at a granular level, what's a legitimate account and what's illegitimate, however you want to define that. And so, like, I think that there's a lot of like normative hand waving that happens and around this, because it's such a difficult problem to be able to tell apart, like, what is genuine freedom of expression, particularly in contexts where it's like to do with like authoritarianism or marginalized groups who are trying to advocate themselves, who don't have a voice in the public sphere. And like Rob says, the affordances of these platforms, incites people to get online and start getting attention. The platforms want you to generate a lot of activity. They want you to be active. They want to get advertising revenue from content. So it's good to drum up business. And when you actually look at, like, I don't want to get my high horse here because there's a lot to discuss today. I'm sure there's a lot of areas here. But if you look at like the policies, the rules that X has in place, for example, and even Twitter before that, you're allowed to create up to 10 accounts, like, yourself, and operate those. That's exactly what they say in the rules. And so there's this kind of like, there's such a paradox. And I was talking about this a couple of weeks with a few people at another conference. There's this paradox where it's like, okay, we want people to come on and to basically coordinate, and to pump content out and to get attention and that attention. But at the same time, we don't want particular kinds of activity, and we can define what those are. So anyway, that's kind of like a bit of a rant, but I think like it's a really good question, because that we don't really have a normative framework that lets us look at data like this and to say, okay, here are the authentic ones and here are the inauthentic ones. And even what you mean by authentic is like so murky, and it differs so much by context, by country, by topic, and everything. I mean, I'm going to cut myself off there, but I think like it's such a good question, and yeah, both conceptually and from a methodological point of view, there's so much work that needs to be done before we can so we can tread a bit more carefully when it comes to protecting freedom of expression, but also protecting truth over the other one. Yeah.
Just to jump off from that, some of the comments that I've seen on Twitter, because I refuse to call X, but thank God Elon's stepped in and saved freedom of expression. Where would we be without Elon? They're trying to censor us using the misinformation language. That's what people have been saying. So it's the whole issue of what is acceptable for, I guess most people would say, maybe, I think, you've got freedom of expression, but if you're spreading falsehoods that could harm people, then that should be limited in some way, right? Because, you can't stream fire in a credit theatre. So that was always the assumption. But now it seems that's not the case anymore. So, that whole assumption is challenged by people who criticize fact checkers, say, who are you to tell us? You're the elite trying to curtail, there's an assault on epistemic authorities, I suppose. And that's a really important issue right now, because it kind of they're trying to sort of say that you're not allowed to censor. You're not allowed to censor any content. And so I don't know if that overlaps with what you but I think for me that's kind of really important issue right now. How do you reclaim that, and say push back against that, because that's gaining traction. Seems as an argument.
I think it's also important to know the difference between misinformation and then also for CRB, right? Inauthentic behavior or inauthentic behavior, because how Facebook defines it, they don't say that it necessarily has to be misinformation to be coordinated inauthentic behavior, right? It's just people pumping out content and trying to deceive someone. And to get back to that original question, I think it's really hard for everyday people to see, okay, what is coordinated inauthentic behavior and what's not. And even for us researchers, it's really hard. So we're kind of relying on platforms to tell us, okay, what is it and what qualifies. So Meta, for example, brings out a threat report every quarter, right, where they say, okay, these are the networks that we took down, and that's why we took them down. But I guess it's still behind the scenes what actually makes them qualify as coordinated inauthentic behavior. There's a range of things that can be the networks themselves, so networks affect network characteristics, how they work together, but it can also be, they look at, okay, is someone claiming to be from the US, but then they look at the IP address and it's in, I don't know, in Europe or somewhere else, right? And then also they look at profile pictures, right? Are they AI generated and all that kind of stuff? So that already gives us information about coordinated inauthentic behavior. But yeah, whether it's misinformation or coordinated inauthentic behavior, it's really hard to first define what it is and get the characteristics.
There is a larger macrocosm beyond the screen. After 50 years of neoliberalism, the ruling shaping factor of contemporary ideology is populism, us and them. And we've seen that in the US yesterday. We've seen that with the support for Le Pen. So the us and them and the distrust of elites and all of those various populist games, they shape mainstream politics as well. We used to think it was just the margin. We used to think it was the extreme right or the National Front in France or whatever. But populism shapes contemporary discourse. After 50 years of neoliberalism, and the progressives are seen as having gone along with neoliberalism and all its inequalities. So populism is the ruling game. That obviously is particularly significant in social media with its conspiracy theories, etc.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, to your point, like that data set that you got, Rob, was given to you by Twitter. Like Twitter basically behind the scenes says these accounts are influence campaigns, and obviously they have a lot of other signals that they use to determine that. Right? Is that right? That these would take
Yeah, it was internal and also through state. I think they were in coordination with the State Department. That's right.
Yeah. Well, we don't have access to those signals, and and they do have a number of different markers that they use to say, okay, like
the IP address. They were going to St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I mean, not to I guess not to undermine the legitimacy of their security protocols, but that we're not part of that. I guess we're not. We're sort of excluded to some extent from formulation of what is legitimate or not. I mean, in this case, that's an extreme example, and probably is called a spade. If there's 1,000 accounts that have exactly the same IP address blocked, and they say they're from X but they're from Y, I mean, it's a clear cut case. But I don't know. I don't really know what my point is here, but it feels like the game. The game is kind of set by in a way that sort of excludes some of the deliberation of the dialogue that you can have about what is acceptable and what's not. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, I'm not sure, but it's like we accept this and we say, okay, here are the trolls, now let's see what they got up to.
Yeah, that's completely right. I mean, and I think this is why, from my point of view, I don't try to detect. I mean, we've done work on bot detection, even using the bot or not, API back there from those days, or a photometer API. Within 6 months or a year, all the work, a lot of that, there's a lot of challenge or critique about the use of that particular API for detecting bots. And my perspective was that it was kind of the best practice at the time, and I think we got some useful insights out of it. And I'm waiting for the next, I'm waiting for a photometer tool for Reddit, or for it to be, start being useful again for X or for Mastodon. There's certain things that I kind of, where I see it as my role to try and innovate, and as a methodologist, that's what I try to do. But there are other aspects of this that I kind of take the data that I'm given, and I just I'm happy that I got a data set from Twitter where they selected or identified who the trolls were, and I'm just sort of interested to see what insights I can get from that without really questioning their approach for identifying trolls too closely. I'm kind of just focusing on other things. But it's also why I'm not trying to do this work in the context of Facebook or any other social media platform currently, because I just don't, I don't have research partnerships with, Facebook. I'm sort of not in that kind of scene. And so it's kind of an area that I don't have access to the data. So I'll just focus on the data sets that are relatively open and available, and try to do interesting things with them. But yeah, it's a kind of it's a challenge, and I think there's a lot of this, a lot of the really interesting work can really only be done from the inside of these platforms, and whether whether they're doing it or not, I don't know, but they're the ones with the data.
Linked to that, because your research is on Twitter, we mainly talked about Twitter, but I remember the Cambridge Analytica incident was about Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And it has more than 2 billion followers, and especially in Australia, many people use Facebook rather than Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter is more political, it's
absolutely
the public sphere, whatever. That's why we keep talking about Twitter most of the time, but here, even Australian politicians do not have many followers. Few people use it, I guess. So, and access to Facebook, I think it's easier, right, John? You can apply. Maria, did you for our team? I think so. Yeah. You need to have some credentials, so you need to prove to them that you are a serious researcher and so on.
And certainly, colleagues working with the AFP through the U, they have access to Facebook for criminal gangs and that sort of thing. But that's much more targeted group, which is partly surveillance and not just sort of understanding social dynamics, if you like.
Yeah, I guess the reason why Twitter was so predominant, or research on Twitter was so predominant back in the days, was because they had the API
exactly.
accessible to everyone. So you could just choose whatever topic you want to research, and then you get the data rather than the platform giving the data to you. And I know, like, I have partnerships with Meta, and it's very limited because after Cambridge Analytica, they took that issue of data very seriously, and they tried to
not in a good way.
For researcher, right? In terms of researchers getting data, they basically were like, okay, now no one gets access to data anymore, right? And so now they are rolling it back a little bit and say like, okay, if you have these credentials, then you get data, but then those data sets don't have like that granular data that you would get from Twitter API, right? Where you can map all of these different networks and you get user IDs and messages and stuff, right? So I guess that also goes towards your point, like there's an issue with the platforms giving us data, and now we need to find out how do we even get data in the first place, right? And it's like, even if we can identify, okay, what is misinformation and what are inauthentic behaviors, then do we have the data to even do it on, yeah. I agree, like Facebook, you can do it these days, but it's very limited. And then obviously Twitter, you pay for it, but it's $2,000 to pay for it.
Yeah, but the question is, yes, it is, or it was convenient to do research on Twitter, but maybe the real action is in Facebook or TikTok, etc. And the voters, they all have equal votes, right? So it doesn't matter if they are influential. They are getting misread, etc. from Facebook, and 2 billion people are using it. People that I know, my relatives, and everybody's using Facebook. They don't use it. So if you are talking about political influence, so on, it is that too, not just only one. Maybe it is bigger. So I don't know. The access is limited, but
I mean, you are 100% right that like Facebook has such a big user base, so everything that you can analyze is going to be impactful. But then you go back to that problem of causality and everything. Like, you still need to make sure that whatever you research actually, that you can combine those relationships and see those relationships, right? So even if you have access, then you still need to be able to map it all out to actually have an impact with your research, right? So I think that's the biggest issue that we face. But yeah, Meta or Facebook in general, they have big impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, Facebook was kind of Cambridge Analytica, kind of that was it for me in terms of my ability and my interest in Facebook as a platform, because I'm a network researcher, and after that, it was impossible to construct networks from Facebook. I mean, even before Cambridge Analytica, you could not construct networks, friendship networks from Facebook unless you got participant, consent, by creating an app and then getting them to install the app, and then that would give you access to their friendship networks, their friends and the connections between their friends that were public. And so in the lead up, a couple of years before Cambridge Analytica, with a PhD student at ANU, Martin Racy, we constructed built a Facebook app, and we used that to collect Facebook friendship data for Australians, older Australians who are on Facebook. And it was no different to what Cambridge Analytica did in terms of well, it was different in the sense we didn't go and sell the data to a political consultancy firm. We weren't trying to micro target kind of voters. But in terms of the consent kind of issue at the time, I mean, we got this approved by ANU Ethics, but we only got consent from the people who agreed to install our app. And then we got access to their friends, and the connections between their friends that were public. So, and that was what a lot of people got outraged by with Cambridge Analytica. Yeah, sure, there were 10,000 people who agreed to install the app, and therefore went through the psychometric testing, but then it was their friends that were then brought in, and that was like 10 million people or something like that. So I remember at the time ANU, I wanted to put out a statement about it, or sort of have a bit of say something in the press, because I've been doing something similar. ANU were like, don't touch it, because they were thinking, there'll be like Australian media will be looking for local stories, and they'll you'll get hammered for it. In the end, I wrote something in the conversation, about 6 months later. But the point I'm trying to say is that up until then, you couldn't collect friendship network data without consent. You could collect interactions between people on Facebook pages, and Tim has done some interesting work with that in anti-vaccination context. But then after Cambridge Analytica, that data was not available anymore. You couldn't find how people were engaging with one another because they both comment on the same post. So yeah, I basically haven't done anything with Facebook since then, apart from teaching. But I agree with you that Facebook is huge. It's hugely important in terms of a representative voter.
compared to Twitter, which is it's an elite space, you know, and that's still interesting because it's about the agenda setting and about the kind of I'm interested in kind of how elites are talking about things like climate change or issues, and so it doesn't sort of rule it out in terms of the work I'm interested in. But I do agree with you in terms of what's the everyday person thinking about and getting exposed to. It's not through Twitter that you find that. Yeah.
And also Instagram is becoming more political. In the past, it was just a silent place that people were posting their photos. It is becoming more political. And also, people are increasingly using. We are working on Australia in Indian and Turkish diasporas in Australia as part of our ARC discovery project, and we are observing. We haven't done any research yet, but we are interviewing some people and so on. So it appears that they are increasingly using WhatsApp groups. Some of them are open to public, but mostly they are not. And they share this sensitive stuff, politically incorrect stuff to WhatsApp groups. So they don't really, they stay away from Twitter or Facebook mostly, but they are more outspoken in these WhatsApp groups. And I think, again, there are more than 2 billion WhatsApp users, so it's huge.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can stop. Thank you, Robert.
For half an hour like this.